Bienvenidos! Today we're going to learn how to speak and understand Spanish. The first thing we need to talk about is what the most important thing is that you need to do in order to learn Spanish. And I'm going to give you a second to think about it, so think for a minute about what is the most important thing I can do to learn to speak and understand Spanish. Okay, here's the answer. The most important thing that you can do to speak and understand Spanish is to use it. In order for you to learn a language, you have to use it. And when you think about how we learned our first language, our native language, we learned to use it. We needed to use it. We used it every day for hours and hours on end. And so this same process needs to happen when we acquire another language. But obviously we're not the same as an infant, so we're going to have to employ some different means as well. But there are two things that still need to happen in order for us to become fluent at understanding and speaking Spanish. And the first thing is exposure, which would be having lots of experience hearing the language. Okay, so the most important thing we need to do is use it. And we need to have lots of exposure. Now, if you live in an area where there aren't a lot of people who speak Spanish, you can still get exposure. And I'm going to talk with you in a minute about how to do that. And the other thing we're going to need to learn how to do is create automaticity. All right? And this is something that happened when we learned our first language. We became automatic at hearing and speaking our first language. And so we're going to have to reproduce this when we learn Spanish. So we're going to work on exposure and automaticity. Now for exposure, because we're not infants anymore and we just can't lay in a little bed all day and listen to our mom talk with us, we have to create situations where we are being exposed to the Spanish language. And we need to do this every day, multiple times per day. Now, infants don't have a lot of other experiences to make connections, so it takes them a long time to learn language. I mean, they're a year old before they can really even begin to reproduce words accurately or sounds accurately. And part of the reason is not just because it takes a long time to learn how to understand and form words, but think about it, they don't even know how to control their muscles yet, their muscles in their mouth. They don't even know how to swallow solid food when they are first born. So they're having to learn a lot of physical formations to use, their mouth in order to produce those sounds. Now, as a language speaker already, you have learned some of those skills. And you also understand how to read and how reading works because you know that letters can make sounds. And you have other life experiences to form connections in your mind. So learning another language doesn't have to be exactly the same as an infant learns it. But we still have to create that exposure. So 5 to 15 minutes a day, 2 to 4 times per day is what you're going to need to start off with. And you'll need to do this every day. If you miss a day, definitely don't miss 2 days in a row. But if you make it a point to do this every day, then you're going to be creating some exposure that's going to help you become more automatic at understanding Spanish and at speaking Spanish. Now, with automaticity, we have to become automatic at being able to understand and hear Spanish. When you are listening to a person speak another language, if you don't speak that language, your brain is on automatic English mode probably. If English is your native language, you're listening to somebody speak and you're expecting to hear English words come out, and you try to interpret everything as English because that's how your mind is trained. But what we need to do is, with exposure, we will eventually be able to switch into a Spanish mode where we can say, oh, I'm expecting Spanish now. And we will be able to understand Spanish words. It's just like when you're training for a sport and you have to, without thinking about it, be able to make those free throw shots. It should become automatic. You know, certain skills in gymnastics should become automatic. You shouldn't have to think about pointing your toes on your handstand. It should just be something that your mind does without you having to consciously think about it. And the way to learn automaticity is with repetition and memorization. So initially you need to memorize your vocabulary, memorize the way things sound, and repeat things. You have to hear the same thing over and over, just like an infant hears the same things over and over again. And as parents and caregivers, we don't necessarily do that on purpose to try to make it boring or try to have the infant memorize things, but they hear the same things over and over again. Would you like your bottle? It's time to go to bed. Certain phrases and words and parents' names they hear over and over again, and then it becomes automatic. They're expecting to hear those words. So automaticity and exposure. As a newborn, newborns usually have about 1 to 3 resources, or people usually, where they get their information. And their newborns are more focused on comprehension or listening. All right, they're not even thinking about trying to reproduce sounds. You know, they're crying when they need their diaper changed, but they don't even know that making a sound is going to elicit a response from their parent. Eventually they learn that crying does elicit a response, and then they'll start imitating. But when they're first born, they're really listening. They're just listening and taking it all in. And as a new language learner for Spanish, that's where you need to start. You know, start out by trying to listen as much as possible. Now, because we're not newborns and we understand how language works, we can go ahead and start trying to repeat and imitate those sounds. But you need to narrow down your resources to 1 to 3, okay? Because you need to have a formation in your mind that you're trying to achieve. And if you have way too many resources out there with different accents and different Spanish pronunciation, it's going to be difficult for you to zone in on exactly what you're trying to reproduce. So just maybe your teacher, maybe your neighbor who's helping you a lot learn Spanish, or a coworker, or a friend. Pick a few people, 1 to 3 people, or 1 to 3 resources. Maybe there's an online resource that has Spanish, and you're listening to that on a regular basis. That's fine. And then work on word recognition. You know, try to be able to, if you're working on an online resource or with a neighbor, try to be able to close your eyes and hear, oh yeah, I understand that word. Because that's where real comprehension happens. You know that you're understanding it when you can close your eyes and still hear it and still understand that word and distinguish that word. At first, everything's going to sound all jumbled together. Somebody's going to say a sentence and you won't be able to pick out that one word that you know. But if you have enough exposure, you'll be able to start picking out the words and phrases that you know. You're going to focus on learning the letters of the alphabet and how to pronounce them. Because even though infants don't know how to spell and don't know the letters of the alphabet, you do understand the reading process. And what's going to happen is, as you start learning Spanish, because Spanish looks so much like English, you're going to see words in Spanish, written in Spanish, but your brain is on automatic for English. So it's going to try to automatically pronounce those words in English. And we need to really nail down that automaticity for Spanish pronunciation right off the bat. So learning the alphabet is one of the foundational skills that you need to have in order to develop good speaking skills and good pronunciation for Spanish. And find someone who can help you and make sure that you're pronouncing things correctly, because it's really important to develop those building blocks as a good foundation. Now, and also you need to be patient with yourself, because you're not going to be able to produce the sounds entirely accurately at first. So don't despair, don't lose hope if you just, are frustrated because you don't hear yourself making the sounds correctly. It takes a long time. It takes practice. So just give yourself time, but keep practicing. Don't give up, and don't say, well, I'll never be able to get this, because you can do it. But be sure that when you're first starting out, that you try to focus in on these 3 areas, just a small group of resources to get the sound in your mind of what you're trying to imitate. Work on individual words, and work on being able to reproduce the sounds of the letters in the alphabet so that you'll be able to sound out words yourself. Now, stage 2, when you're in the infant stage, you can broaden your resources a little bit, 5 to 10 resources. That could be online resources, it could be a group of classmates, could be co-workers, and then start working on common words and phrases. So at this point, you pretty much have the alphabet down, and you know how the letters of the alphabet are supposed to sound. And so you can start using your reading skills to reproduce some Spanish, and also to get that verbal comprehension going. So when you hear things, you'll be able to think about how that might be spelled even. And you're going to work on your numbers, because numbers are essential in life. That's just an essential communication skill, to know your numbers. So if you think about the things that we teach little bitty children, from infancy, we're trying to teach them the letters of the alphabet and their numbers, because those are really important communication tools. Now, the next stage, as a toddler, you're going to broaden your resources even more, because you now have mastered, a small group, and now you can maybe speak with other classmates and understand classmates, or understand, people just in your neighborhood or in your workplace, other people. So, or get some more online resources, but broaden your resources at this point once you've mastered the numbers and you've got some basic phrases down, and start working maybe on some vocabulary themes. So you're going to think about, clothing. What is there that I need to be able to communicate about clothing? What is there that I need to be able to communicate about the weather? What do I need to be able to communicate about food? And so work on some themes there, some communication skills for themes. You're going to work on basic communication at this point. As a toddler, you're actually going to be able to communicate with people now. Do some greetings and some, basic conversation about how are you today, or, how was the movie last night. So little communication that can go on, because now you're going to be able to understand a lot more than when you were a newborn baby. So you might be able to have some short, brief, communicative moments with people. And then you're going to start, now that you know how to pronounce letters of the alphabet, and you have some foundational words, you can go to the library and check out some basic books. And you can feel confident that you're able to reproduce those sounds. And what's going to happen is you're going to be reading out loud. But so not only are you working on your fluency and your automaticity in pronouncing and in speaking, but because you're saying things out loud, you're also working on your comprehension. So this is going to help you immensely when you get to the toddler stage and you can actually read aloud from books. This right here is going to be the key to your ability to continue on progressively becoming fluent in Spanish. Then at the preschool stage, okay, when we feel like we're actually solidly in the preschool stage, at this point, you're probably going to need to know about 2,000 words in Spanish. This is when we become somewhat fluent and able to communicate in the language, any language. So you'll need to understand how much vocabulary needs to be learned by the time you're kind of at the preschool level. You're going to have 20 or more resources that you feel somewhat comfortable understanding and using to communicate in Spanish. You're going to be reading more for communication, so things will become more meaningful to you. They won't be just board books with 1 or 2 words or a short phrase on the page. They'll have something more meaningful. And you might be able to write for communication at this point. And at this point, you can start studying grammar. Prior to this, though, studying grammar is going to be difficult and somewhat awkward because you don't have enough of the language for things to really make sense. When you're learning a language, you need to listen and repeat. You really need to focus on the sounds that you're making. It's very tempting to try to read things at the very outset, but again, because you know English and your brain is probably set to automatically pronounce things the English way, you need to focus on the sound rather than the letters. All right, so practice with your eyes closed. Practice listening to your resources with your eyes closed. Work on your fluency and pronunciation. You're going to want to repeat some things over and over again until you can pronounce them correctly and be fluent in them. That's what infants do, and that's what babies do. So we want to become automatic and just fluent with a small group of basic words and phrases. You want to focus on pronunciation and work with resources that have more of a native accent. So a classmate who's trying to learn Spanish and is basically at your same level is not going to be a very good resource at the beginning stages. You're going to need to find resources like a Spanish teacher or a neighbor who is a native Spanish speaker, or someone who's at a more advanced level in Spanish who could help you with your pronunciation. You need someone for you to listen to and someone to listen to you and correct your pronunciation. And this is key here. You may need to even hire a tutor, but it shouldn't be a long-term commitment. It should be just somebody who could listen to you a few times and steer you in the right direction with your pronunciation. Because what we don't want to happen is we don't want you to study Spanish for a year and practice wrong all year long, and then go back and try to correct that pronunciation because you've practiced for so long incorrectly. It's so much more work to go back and try to fix those and then redevelop good habits. It's much better to, right at the outset, develop that good pronunciation, and then your habits are automatic. You're automatically pronouncing things correctly. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, initially, there is so much to know, and that word, 2,000 words, seems like a lot, but I want to point out, read this phrase here, let me see. The more you know, the easier it is to know more. Meaning, the more you learn about the Spanish language, the more connections that you're going to have in your mind, and the easier it is going to become to connect to new information. The more you know, the easier it's going to be to know more.